when we run our workshops, when we do our exercises, we tell people we're essentially teaching you shortcuts to get into that flow state. When you need to get into that flow state, sometimes you might need to use that fight or flight judging part of your brain, right? It's a survival voice. Sometimes you might get an email from a lion saying, "I'm coming to eat you." So you should take that as seriously as a lion coming to eat you.
You shouldn't just stop and be amazed by the fact that a lion knows your email address.
I mean, save that for later.
Okay.
Save that for later. You can really dive into the lion's tech
Voice to text.
They must be using voice to text activation, I think.
That's right. They don't use AI. They use lion. All right. When as Anthony said, I'd been working in enterprise sales for a long time, and one of the things I realized after I started to get exposed to improv and I took some improv classes and things, were that every successful sales call I was doing, every successful sales meeting I had were like mini improv shows. Because what was happening in those meetings is I was getting these offerings from the audience. My audience was my client. I'd ask them what were some of the troubles they were having, what were some of the challenges, and then I would take their answers and weave them into the story structure that I already had, right? I already knew the message I needed to send to them, but being able to weave that in was the improv part of it. And so that's something that I had started to talk to a lot of sales teams and sales leaders about, which is this idea that you can't go into any sales meeting expecting that you know exactly how the conversation is going to go. You can't be like, oh, they're going to say this, then I'm going to say that, and then they're going to say this, and I'm going to say, oh, I've got slide 3. It says it answers that exact question. Because you go in, they ask you one question, throws you off the rails, and if you're the kind of person who's memorized everything and you're living in that judgment part of your brain where you're like, everything has to go A, B, C, D, that's a tremendous disservice to you, right? What happens then is you need to get into that mindset where you go, all right, I'm going to go in here with a completely open mind. I know what I know. I just need access to that part of my brain. Anthony talked about the medial prefrontal cortex. That houses all of our memories and our experiences. So doing exercises that allow you to get into that mindset so that when you get in the room and you get asked a question that could be as simple as, what do you plan to eat for dinner tonight? And if you're not prepared for it and you're not in the right mindset, that can trigger fight or flight or freeze immediately.
Yeah. And that's been the source of many, let's say, heated discussions among couples in the home about what's for dinner or what are we going to do about dinner.
It's the worst. It's the worst part of adulthood.
Yeah, it's a top 3. But Vivek, it's I can relate to it on a personal thing. I mean, let's bring it all back to me because it's all about me. But I'm in sales and I'm the keynote curator, and I provide keynote speakers, in this case, the unkeynote, to my clients. And as you said, you prepare and what they need to know. And I don't want to, litigate it out, but it's what we think they need to know. And then they give you what they really need to know. And the ability to be open and disarm your own predispositions is the art. And the question for both of you or either of you, or at the same time, we can try that again, is, you're both leaning on the science of it all.
Yeah.
Improv has been around for decades, but now that you contextualize it with the hard science, the data, the understanding of how the brain works, all the way from, being evolved and running away from a saber-toothed tiger or a lion emailing you, what benefit does that have to understanding it, both as an intellectual exercise, but also the great salespeople, I would say, Vivek, go in and read the room and dance in the conversation and, oh, the music is changing or the tempo's changing or the body language is different. And they've done that innately anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can argue about when improv was created, but realistically, every single conversation you have is improvised. It's unless you're standing on stage and you've all memorized your lines, pretty much any real life conversation is improvised. But what I loved about improv as I started to learn it and get to know it is that it is a tremendous tool that has been used, and I'll get to sales in a second because this does not describe most salespeople, but it's a tool that's been used for a long time by folks who don't feel like they belong in order to get into that mindset where they can feel like they're part of this community. Viola Spolin, who is considered the mother of modern day improv, created these improv games that we all know and love now as a way to help immigrant children and immigrant families feel like they belonged in society in Chicago, right? At the Hull House. And so that's the kind of the birth of the modern day improv. And it's only been recently that we've actually spent some time studying the science behind it. So Anthony and I and Freestyle Plus have worked very closely with a lab out of UCSF with a doctor named Dr. Charles Lim, who's been studying the effects of improv on your brain, like what actually happens when you get into that flow state, which is how we know as much as we do about it.